Today we're going to talk about China's treasure fleet. This will be the last in the series about discovering America. When we talked in that first video, I mentioned that, actually first or second video, that it wasn't until the late 1400s that Europe had the technology to be able to travel across the ocean without staying inside of land, being able to see the horizon. But China, it was almost 100 years ahead of Europe in their technology. In fact, a relatively young man named Zheng would become what was called the Admiral of the Ocean Seas, and from about 1412 through 1433, Zheng would make 7 voyages across the ocean. Zheng was born in China's interior. He was raised a Muslim. His father and ancestors were farmers, farmed the land. But at age 13, he was captured by the emperor's army. He was made a eunuch, that is, he was castrated, and it was common for them to keep the severed manhood to be buried with the eunuch when the eunuch died. So at age 13, he was made a eunuch, which was a prerequisite for service at the court of the emperor. He would eventually reach the highest rank of any eunuch. He became a favorite of Zhudi, the emperor, the third emperor of the Ming dynasty, and he would be commissioned by the emperor to begin these voyages. Zheng grew to the height of 7 feet tall, so he was a very imposing character. On the first slide of this PowerPoint, there is a painting of Zheng, which shows his physique, his character, reflects his character. China had been trading with other countries for about 300 years. The Chinese demand for special spices that were not available in China, but were available in the East Indies and in East Asia. Also medicinal herbs like frankincense and myrrh that came from the Middle East, and other raw materials. In fact, into the eastern ports of China came ginseng, lacquerware, celadon, gold and silver, horses and oxen from Korea and Japan. Into the southern ports came hardwoods and other special tree products, ivory, rhinoceros horn, brilliant kingfisher feathers, say that 3 times, ginger, sulfur, and tin from Vietnam and Thailand. So those items that went into the southern ports came from Vietnam and Thailand, while those items that went into the eastern ports of China came from Korea and Japan. So China had a very extensive network of trade even before Zheng began his voyages. And on this third slide of the PowerPoint, it shows a map of the different routes, the different areas in which China traded. Emperor Zhudi's treasure fleet. Talk a little bit about the emperor's treasure fleet. Zhudi was a very outward-looking emperor. He wanted to send a treasure fleet out to demonstrate or reflect his power, to build his prestige, and also to bring back tribute to China, to the emperor, from these foreign countries. Zhudi was an entrepreneur, interested in business and trade. He had ships built to his specifications, which were over 400 foot long, 160 foot wide. They had 9 masts with red silk sails, 4 decks. Each of these treasure ships could carry 2,500 tons of cargo. They were armed with dozens of cannons, and they were accompanied by hundreds of smaller ships. On the first voyage of Zheng, there were 317 vessels with 28,000 men. Zheng's main ship carried everything that was important, that was crucial to courtiers, to men of the court of China's emperor. Barbers, physicians, entertainers, plus, of course, all the navigators, the sailors, the engineers, everything that was necessary to make life pleasant on these voyages. Usually, each voyage, each of these 7 voyages that Zheng went on, would take about 2 years, each voyage, from leaving the port of China, going to the different countries, and then going back to China would take about 2 years. On the 4th slide in this PowerPoint, it shows a drawing of what Zheng's fleet would have looked like as he left the port of China, with the huge ships plus all the smaller ships that went with him. The smaller ships, sometimes one ship would simply be for carrying fresh water. Other ships would carry food produce. So each ship was necessary for these voyages to go along with these treasure ships. I want to talk a little bit about shipbuilding and navigational technology in China. And again, keep in mind, this is almost 100 years before Columbus sailed across the Atlantic Ocean. Over 75 years before Europe even began getting this kind of technology. The frames of these ships were built in sections, in watertight sections, that then would be assembled together, bolted together with brass bolts. And in fact, these sections of the ship, these watertight sections, resemble the partitions inside bamboo. If you ever look in a bamboo cane, you'll see that it is divided into sections, and China used that idea of these partitions in building the framework for their ships. So it's built in separate sections with bulkheads, again to reinforce the idea of watertight compartments. Then it was caulked with coconut fiber, sealed with boiled tung tree oil, and lime. And of course, the bows of the ships were reinforced to be able to travel in the gigantic waves of the oceans, so that these ships could just plow through, regardless of the height of the waves, the turbulent sea. Very adequate for ocean-going journeys. They used lateen sails, which meant these were sails that could be turned to take advantage of the wind. Rather than having to go in whichever way the wind was blowing, they could turn these lateen sails to be able to go against the wind as easily as with the wind. As far as navigational technology, one of the main things that they had was the navigational compass, magnetic compass, so that they could know where they were even in stormy seas with clouds or fog. They could tell which direction they were going. And they had these elaborate nautical charts. One of the charts that there is a replica of is 7 feet long. Nautical chart that shows the land formations, islands, so the physical characteristics that would help in their navigation across the ocean. Plus, they had star charts, so they could measure where they were on Earth according to the stars. And again, this is something that Europe won't have until in the 1480s, before they'll have this technological ability. As far as keeping time, they used an hourglass. Very elaborate but simple things such as an hourglass. The Chinese had developed a way to measure their speed as they traveled across the ocean by dropping special boards, and there's a technical name for it, I'm sorry, I couldn't pronounce even if I could remember it, but they'd drop it from the bow of the ship, and then by the time it got to the the port, that they measured the time that it took for that board to get from the front of the ship to the back of the ship to be able to calculate the speed that the ship was traveling. So absolutely had all the technology necessary to make long ocean voyages. Now, there's I started to say a scholar, I'm not sure, he's a British author, and I think he served in the Royal Navy, a man named Gavin Menzies, who wrote a couple of books about Zheng He. One was called 1412, China Discovering America, and the second book, 1419, talking about China's ocean voyages. Menzies' book kind of popularized this idea of studying Zheng He. But most scholars call Menzies' works pseudo-history. So there's not a lot of scholars that accept all of Gavin Menzies' theories, but he did bring about a recognition of this navigational ability that China had. So more recently, Chinese scholars, American scholars, historians have studied these voyages of Zheng He. At the end of this PowerPoint, I have references that will give you ideas if you want to do more reading, research about Zheng He. They're available for you to peruse. So on this next slide, it shows an image in the left-hand corner of Zheng's three or four large treasure ships plus all the auxiliary ships that were sailing along with him, and also a map depicting the 7 voyages of Zheng. He sailed across the Indian Ocean, the Bay of Bengal, to Southeastern Asia, to India, up into the Middle East. Some of his voyages went up the Red Sea. Zheng, being a Muslim, wanted to make the traditional journey to Mecca. While he himself was not able to go, he did send a ship with other Muslims that were with him and his fleet to go to visit Mecca. We know that he sailed along the east coast of Africa, Madagascar, and down to Mozambique. This Gavin Menzies is the one that postulated that Zheng had reached the Americas. Now, there are some historians who are looking into that. There are supposedly some artifacts and even some people along the eastern coast of South America that seem to be ancestors of the Chinese. But again, major scholars are not buying into that yet. But the research is ongoing, so who knows? In the next 10, 20 years, maybe we will have more information about Zheng's voyages. On these voyages, which again, remember, Zhudi's purpose was to exercise his power, to show his prestige, and to get tribute from these other countries, to add to the treasury of the Chinese emperor. There were many diplomats from these countries that Zheng visited that would travel back to China with Zheng on his return voyages to pay tribute to the emperor. And their recorded responses was that they were very impressed with the emperor's power and prestige and his court. Some of the things that Zheng would take with him to trade with other countries that he visited would be jade works, jade statues, statuettes, jewelry, sapphire jewelry. So many of the things from China that were indigenous to China were traded with these other countries. Some of the items that were traded that would go back to the emperor's court were a lot of exotic animals, like the giraffe. And I have a slide here in this PowerPoint that shows some of these animals that China had never seen before until Zheng brought them back. So there was the giraffe, the camel, the elephant, zebra, leopards. One of the leopards that was described was one that had golden spots instead of the black spots that you usually see that leopards have. So a lot of exotic animals, plus spices, herbs, tree products, a lot of exotic items that Zheng took with him back to the court of the emperor. There is a replica of Zheng's ship in Beijing, I believe it is, and I do have an image of it here on this PowerPoint. According to one of the sources that I studied, that I researched, Zheng's ship that he captained, he was the admiral of, there was never a ship that large until World War II aircraft carriers. So they compared Zheng's ship to World War II aircraft carrier. So these were ships that wouldn't be replicated, wouldn't be matched in size or expertise until in the 20th century. I find Zheng's history and the history of these voyages and their navigational technology really fascinating. To end this PowerPoint, Zheng died on the return voyage of his 7th voyage. That was in 1433. And a new emperor had come to the court of China, and this new emperor was surrounded by conservative Confucius court advisors who talked the emperor into stopping these voyages and getting rid of all evidence of these voyages. China returned to its insular policies. China has always had the tradition of being a very insular culture. A lot of these Confucian court advisors told the emperor that all these exotic items that Zheng had brought into China was corrupting their traditional culture. Also, they complained that it was too costly. So, long story short, the voyages were over, and all records of Zheng and his voyages were confiscated and destroyed. Fortunately for us, 2 or 3 of the interpreters that had sailed with Zheng managed to keep their records, so that we do have knowledge of some of these voyages that has been rediscovered in recent times. Before the end of the 1400s, it became a capital offense to build boats of more than 2 masts. So no more ocean-going ships were to be built. By 1500, all ocean-going ships had been destroyed, which was a tremendous amount. 1400, the year 1400, China had 3,500 ocean-going ships. And by 1500, they've all been destroyed. The shipyards were destroyed. Now, recently, and I've read some of the archaeological reports about discoveries that archaeologists are making of these ancient shipyards that they've been discovered, that supports the idea of China having the ability of building these huge ocean-going ships. So it's a fascinating history, I think. I probably will continue to try to do some research, learn a little more. But the last slide of this PowerPoint has some references where you can find information. For instance, cite the Weatherhead East Asian Institute at Columbia University. Has a good history of the Ming voyages. Michael Yamashita wrote a book called Zheng, Tracing the Epic Voyages of China's Greatest Explorer. And 2 or 3 others there if you want to look into it for yourself. So this is the last of the series about Columbus and discovering America. And next time we will introduce a new topic. Thank you for your support. Thank you for listening. We'll try this again. The end. Please come back, and if you haven't subscribed, of course, please subscribe so that you'll get notice whenever we upload another one of these series. Thank you.